For the next few minutes, you're going to hear a real, honest conversation from the House of Commons that directly affects your life in Canada. This video breaks down why asylum claims are rising, why the system is overloaded, why many Canadians are asking if the system is being used the right way.
There are more unlicensed immigration consultants in the province of Punjab in India than
You'll hear lawmakers question whether people are coming to Canada for real protection or just using loopholes after their temporary status expires. We'll talk about visas, refugee claims, immigration consultants, and what the government's real goal is for population growth. Most importantly, we'll explain how all of this affects housing, jobs, taxes, and services for every Canadian living here today. In next part, you will hear a direct question from MP Brad Redekop. He is asking about the sharp rise in inland refugee claims and the massive backlog this has created. The core question is simple but serious. How many people are applying for asylum because they truly need protection, and how many are using the system as a pathway to stay in Canada after their temporary status expires? This question sets the tone for the entire discussion because it goes to the heart of fairness, system abuse, and trust in Canada's immigration process.
You also cited a sharp rise in inland refugee claims, which has resulted in a major backlog, of course. In your view, what proportion of current asylum claims are driven by protection needs versus people that are just system shopping, looking for a good deal for citizenship?
Here's a question for you all to ponder. Are some refugee claims really about safety, or are they being used as a strategy to stay in Canada? This matters because it impacts you. It impacts every Canadian. It affects how fast claims are processed, how tax dollars are spent, and the pressure on housing and healthcare. When the system is overloaded, genuine refugees end up waiting longer, and public trust gets shaken. In next, David Thomas says the facts speak for themselves. Many of those applying for refugee status from within Canada do so because their temporary status has expired. He highlights a big spike in claims from Mexican citizens after the removal of the visitor visa requirement. This led to a surge in inland claims, similar to what happened in the early 2000s. The answer to the question is clear. Policy changes can create unexpected consequences. Main point need to focus. Many claims come from people who were legally in Canada but ran out of options.
Well, I think the facts speak for themselves, right? I mean, that a lot of the people that have applied for refugee status from within Canada are people that have their status, their temporary status expiring. We've had a huge spike from citizens of Mexico. We had done away with the visitor visa requirement for Mexican citizens a second time in 2016 up until 2024 was a mistake. It happened in the early 2000s as well. It led to a big spike of inland claims. And
here's a question for you all to ponder. Why are so many people making asylum claims after coming to Canada on temporary status? This question matters to you, to me, and to every Canadian living here. Temporary visas are meant for work, study, or visits, not as a final backup plan to stay forever. When this line gets blurred, it affects fairness, trust, and how Canadians view the entire immigration system. In next video, David Thomas says that the biggest number of inland asylum claims are now coming from Indian nationals. Many of these people entered Canada legally under temporary status and then later applied for refugee protection. This raises a serious question about the real motivation behind many of these claims. Brad Redekop then asks the most important follow-up. How many of these claims are actually from people who fear for their lives? Main point need to focus. When temporary programs turn into mass asylum pathways, the system starts to break down. Real refugees who truly need protection may face more doubt and longer delays. Canadians begin to question whether the system is being used fairly or exploited.
And now we're seeing the biggest number are inland claims are from Indian nationals, and many of them came here under temporary status. So you do have to question, what is the underlying motivation?
In your experience, what would you estimate are the number of so-called legitimate asylum claims, people who truly are fearing for their lives?
Here's a question for you all to ponder. Is Canada being too careful or not careful enough when deciding who gets to stay? This question matters to every Canadian because it shapes the future of the country. It affects how fast Canada grows, how much pressure is put on housing, healthcare, and jobs, and how strong public trust is in the immigration system. The decisions made today will impact Canada for decades. In next video, David Thomas says it is hard to put a clear number on legitimate asylum claims. He talks about conversations with adjudicators and the internal struggle over how strictly applications should be reviewed. He then points to a much bigger question. What is Canada's real goal when it comes to bringing people into the country? Some groups believe Canada should accept up to 1 million people a year and aim for 100 million people by the end of the century. Main point need to focus. When the system is less strict, claims move faster, but the risk of abuse goes up. Big population targets can push the system to prioritize numbers over careful review. Canada's infrastructure is already under strain, especially housing and healthcare. Canadians deserve clear answers about how fast the country should grow and at what cost.
There often is a feeling, I think, within the tribunal itself as to whether or not how hard we want to scrutinize applications for people coming in, because I think that the bigger question is, what is Canada's overall goal in terms of bringing people in? There are some people that believe we should be bringing in 1 million people a year, right? The Century Initiative that wants to have 100 million people in Canada by the end of the century.
Here's a question for you all to ponder. Is Canada focused more on bringing in people or on making sure the system is fair and controlled? This question matters because it affects daily life for Canadians. When immigration is not properly managed, it puts pressure on jobs, wages, rent, and public services. People want a system that is compassionate but also ordered and fair. In next, David Thomas says if the government's goal is simply to bring in more people, then the system will not be very selective. People will find ways to self-select, either by crossing borders or by making refugee claims after entering Canada on temporary status. This, he says, is driven by what the government really sees as its objective for population growth. Main point need to focus. When selection standards are lowered, system abuse becomes easier. Canadians feel left behind when policy focuses on volume instead of planning. Over time, this damages trust in immigration and government decisions.
If your push is we need bodies, we need people, we're not very selective as to where they come from, then you're not going to press very hard on those things, are you? You're going to let people walk across the road, self-select themselves as they did crossing Roxham Road when that was open, or other people just coming here in temporary status and making artificial refugee claims.
Here's a question for you all to ponder. Are immigration consultants helping the system or making the problem worse? This question matters because many people rely on consultants to make life-changing decisions. When advice is wrong or misleading, it leads to false claims, fraud, and more pressure on the system. In the end, both Canadians and honest applicants pay the price. In this clip, Brad Redekop asks what changes or improvements can be made to the immigration consultant system. David Thomas says Canada needs to do a better job and be more selective about who is allowed to work as a consultant. He suggests that current controls are not strong enough. Main point need to focus. Weak regulation allows bad officers to continue operating. Many people are pushed into making claims that have little chance of success. The system becomes clogged with cases that should never have existed. Stronger selection and oversight would protect applicants and Canadians alike.
You spent time with the Immigration Consultant Society. What kinds of changes or improvements do you think could be made there? I mean, there's lots of issues with consultants. I think there's been attempts to get it under control in Canada, but we know that there's lots of people from outside the country that are maybe difficult to control. But do you have any suggestions on what we could change or improve on that front?
Well, I think that we need to probably do a better job, and I think there are moves to be a little bit more selective in terms of who we permit to be consultants. I mean,
here's a question for you all to ponder. How big is the immigration consultant problem, and is Canada losing control? This question matters because many of the decisions that shape Canada's immigration system are being influenced from outside the country. When unlicensed consultants operate without oversight, the consequences are felt inside Canada. In Next, David Thomas says the conduct he saw as a tribunal member was shocking and unbelievable. He says many people should never be allowed to operate as consultants at all. He also reveals that there may be more unlicensed immigration consultants in Punjab, India, than there are licensed consultants in all of Canada. This shows how massive and difficult the problem really is. Main point need to focus. Unlicensed consultants fuel false promises and system abuse. Canada has very limited control over operators working outside the country. The true scale of this problem may be far bigger than most Canadians realize. Without strong action, the system will continue to be exploited.
The kinds of conduct that I saw as a tribunal member was unbelievable, and a lot of people, frankly, should not be regulated at all. They're not suitable for that, and I think that we need to be more selective of that. The other massive problem, I've been told that there are more unlicensed immigration consultants in the province of Punjab in India than there are of all fully licensed immigration consultants in Canada. So the problem is astronomical, and I don't think we have a good sense of how big the numbers are.
Today's discussion shows just how complex and serious Canada's immigration and asylum system has become. From rising inland refugee claims to temporary status holders applying for asylum to big population targets and weak consultant oversight. Every decision has real consequences. This is not about being against immigration. It is about fairness, honesty, and making sure the system works for people who truly need protection, while also protecting Canadians and the country's future. The questions raised today are questions every Canadian should be asking. How many claims are legitimate? How fast should Canada grow? And who is really in control of the system? If you want more clear, fact-based breakdowns of House of Commons debates, immigration policy, Canada news, and how these decisions affect your daily life in Canada, make sure to subscribe to the Canada Insight Network, like the video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown.